Hey guys, Captain Retro here. Today I wanted to do a follow-up on my History of the Arcade and Attica Railroad series. It's been a while, and I wanted to talk about Arcade's newest acquisition. If you live in town or follow this channel, then you know full well which unit I'm talking about, but maybe you haven't been to Arcade in a while. Maybe you don't follow the Railroad. In which case, I hope that you enjoy the video and learn a little something new. Today we're talking about Arcade and Attica 114, the newest Alco in Arcade, the newest acquisition. The unit arrived in July of 2023 under its own power and has been in regular freight service since the 20th of that month. On the 20th of July, the unit was taken north on its own, making the return trip with a string of 12 empty hoppers. The next day, it hauled 10 loaded hoppers to North Java successfully, and the rest has been, as I would say, present history. The unit, originally built by Alco in 1952 for the Delaware and Hudson Railroad, was built as a standard RS3 with the number 4112. The unit was originally delivered in a factory black and yellow scheme, which doesn't look too dissimilar from the livery that it wore when it arrived in Arcade, but that's skipping a fair bit of its history, so we'll come back to that. After it was in service with the black and yellow scheme for some time, in an unknown year, it was repainted into the iconic blue and gray lightning stripe scheme, which the D&H had on a lot of their locomotives. In 1975, the unit was overhauled by Morrison Knutson. I don't know how to pronounce the K, so I'm just going to call it MK moving forward. I've heard several different pronunciations. But they went ahead and modified the unit into what the D&H referred to as an RS3M. The short hood was lowered to allow better visibility. A box with components for the dynamic braking system was put on the long hood, which itself was lifted a couple inches to accommodate the switch from an Alco 244 prime mover to an Alco 251, which provided a little more horsepower for the engine. The odd appearance gave them the nickname Clubfoots, and several of these RS3s on different railroads, when they were rebuilt, would obtain unique nicknames. One that comes to mind is the Hammerheads, which were RS3s that had their short hoods heightened, and the long hoods remained the same. When it was rebuilt in 1975, it was also chosen that this engine would be a bicentennial locomotive. So as it emerged from the MK rebuild, it emerged painted red, white, and blue, and sporting the number 1976 instead of 4112. Along the long hood were the words Delaware and Hudson and Spirit of Freedom written in cursive white font. On April 1st, 1976, Unit 1976 led the first D&H train over Conrail's Southern Tier, Maine, the route between Binghamton and Buffalo. It was the first D&H to use the railroad's traffic rights on that line. In 1979, the D&H decided to renumber the unit from 1976 to number 506, which better matched the other rostered RS3s, but it would remain in service sporting the patriotic color scheme until 1988, when it wound up either sold or donated to the Tioga Central Railroad. In 1990, the cursive lettering was painted over with blue paint, and 2 years later, it left where it was, along with the rest of the Tioga Central collection, ending up in storage for 2 years at Whitney Point, New York, until 1994, where it was moved to Wellsboro, Pennsylvania, joining the Pennsylvania edition of the Tioga Central. In 2008, Patrick Connors, who helped me with much of the information and pictures of this video, took these photos of it as it was on the WNC a few years before the Genesee and Wyoming took over. In 2014, 2 years after these pictures were taken, the Western New York and Pennsylvania Railroad purchased the unit alongside S2 number 14, and 506 was moved to Olean to join the all-Alco roster there. It is my unofficial understanding that the number 506 was changed to number 406 simply because the roster numbering system on the LAL and WNYP goes off axle number. So if you have a diesel that has 4 axles, the number is usually 400 something. If you have a 6-axle engine, it's usually 600 something. In 2016, the engine got repainted into the WNYP corporate livery, which is yellow and black, and retroactively almost acts like an homage to the D&H's as delivered RS3 livery. And it was this paint job that it had arrived in arcade wearing. It saw active service until 2022, where it had been relegated to yard switching and then taken out of service by management entirely. This was an echo of the future, where a chunk of the all-Alco roster would be usurped by newer GE locomotives. It was here in Olean that I had my first run-in with it, and caused me personally to get interested in that railroad. Little did I know that in the coming years this engine would eventually call arcade home. During the early 2020s, the arcade in Attica was having to doublehead almost every train northbound, it seemed, due to how much commodity was needed at ride doors. It used to be common for the A&A to take a single cab and maybe one or two hoppers north, and then bringing back the empties in batches, either with one or two diesels. But by the time that I started recording them, it seemed like they had always had two diesels on their runs. With 18 being down and the diesels used for both excursions and freight, and on double excursions such as the Christmas trains no less, it was decided that the Arcade in Attica needed more motive power. The cabs were just getting so worn out. And of course, cost was key. Looking back at it, number 113 was brought in from Staten Island via a truck flatbed in 2014. And number 112 was shipped all the way from Colorado on a flat car. The less distance you have to move a locomotive, the less financial burden it is. The less invested, the better. And so you look near to you and what railroads reside near you. The ANA considered a NCAB switcher, an S-something class, but ultimately the railroad went with WNYP 406 because the railroad had cited wanting to get rid of it, and unlike the S-series diesel, it was connected by rail. So in February of 2023, the engine was inspected by ANA's crews who went down to Olean. The engine was started up, papers were signed. In April, there was a holdup regarding replacements needing to be made on parts that had gone bad since the last test, and the unit was briefly in service on the WNYP until the Buffalo and Pittsburgh gave the go-ahead to make the move, going from Olean to Machias to Arcade. That day finally came in July when the locomotive, along with a Jordan spreader which had been purchased alongside it, made the move under its own power, pausing at Machias Junction for the crew change from western New York and Pennsylvania to a Buffalo and Pittsburgh crew, and then roaring past Lime Lake, up through Machias, Delavan, and finally coming into Arcade Junction. The engine was brought up past the trestle across Cattaraugus Creek to make sure that it could make that bend, and then for a publicity shot, it was posed next to Center Cab 110, which was the first ever diesel on the Arcade in Attica. As mentioned in the beginning, since July of 2023, the engine has been handling freight and giving the center cabs a well-deserved rest of responsibility. Ironically, the engine arrived a mere day prior to the July 2023 center cab charter, which led rail fans all the way to North Java and back with stage shots and run-bys, and for the most part, the center cabs have not made the trek to North Java since its arrival, effectively making the photo charter a proper send-off. After being in service for a short while, the unit was patched over to Arcade in Attica officially, now sporting a big 114 on the long hoods and an obscure vintage Arcade in Attica logo from old paperwork on the cab sides. This scheme is an homage to another livery seen on the D&H RS3Ms, as shown by this example. Being a fan of the railroad, I had also mocked up these schemes independently, and I just wanted to throw these out here, I guess for preservation. Ultimately, the decision made was a logical one, as the unit was only repainted in 2016, and it was in great condition. It's a waste to sit here and repaint all that black when it was perfectly good condition. In a roundabout kind of way, Dynamo Productions, a YouTube channel on here, had uploaded some vintage footage of number 14, Arcade's old 460 excursion locomotive running in the 1970s. And the paint that it was wearing was yellow trim with orange lettering and numbering. So exactly the same as what number 114 now sports. So in a roundabout way, this ended up being an homage to number 14 on the ANA. On October 9th, the railroad opted to substitute 113 with 114 for a special run to Couriers and back, commemorating the new diesel, and also due to some Alco enthusiasts that were visiting from the UK from across the pond, making this the first time the unit had pulled an excursion since its time on the Tioga Central. As of today, the unit can be seen roughly twice a week hauling freight to and from North Java. And with the news that number 18, the railroad's Alco 280 steam locomotive, has officially passed its hydro test, it won't be long until you can catch two iconic Alcos here in Arcade, not just one. I hope you guys learned something and that you guys enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys in the next video.